Martinez. And there is the fifth wild pitch of the inning.
Welcome to When the Lights Go Out. I'm Sam Cricky, and I'd like to spend some time on perhaps the most interesting psychological phenomenon in the sports world. The other day, I take Monty, Eli, and Mufadal to the local driving range to practice golf. I'm no expert, but I've been playing most of my life, tend to shoot low 90s, high 80s. So when we get there, I'm expecting to be helping them improve, teaching them some things, because they're all pretty much brand new. Upon getting there, however, I realized that my shot had gone completely awry. I grew increasingly frustrated, and my friends teased me with cries of the yips, the sudden loss of ability for an athlete. Fortunately for me, I figured it out by the end of the day, but for some professionals, it can be a never-ending nightmare. I'd argue that golf is the most frustrating sport on earth. Everything that goes wrong is no one's fault but your own. In no other sport do you have to wait so long in between actions. In no other individual sport can micro decisions affect your score so heavily. Mess up your serve in tennis? Get another chance for free. Throw a gutter ball in bowling? Clean up for spare. In golf, things as simple as going one club too high, one club too low, can drastically increase your score, as it affects the following shots. Golf is both where the term originates and the sport in which it is most commonly associated. Tommy Armour, 3-time major champion, is said to have invented the term after he was forced to retire from full-time PGA competition at the young age of 33 due to an inability to hit short putts and the stress that accompanied it. Armour had just won the US Open for his first major championship in 1927, where he went into the Shawnee Open as the favorite. On the par 5 17th hole, it is said that he scored a 23, which would be the highest ever score on a hole in a PGA tournament match. While there are conflicting reports on this account that claim he had just an 11, holes like these plagued him for the rest of his career. He was able to fight his yips en route to 2 more major championships in 1930 and 1931, but some are not so lucky. Many legendary golfers such as Sam Snead and Ben Hogan have also suffered from this ability-degrading condition, and there is no known cure. Sometimes, you just forget how to play. I'm not so smart, so here's our resident smart guy, Monty, to talk about the scientific aspects of the yips.
Yips can have an impact on anyone, but are most commonly found in those who have professions that require consistent, precise movements in the hands and arms. Bringing this back to sports, because of the precise movements that many sports require, it's not surprising that many athletes suffer from the yips. Despite this, most research on the yips focuses on golfers with a particular interest in how it impacts their putting. In the paper, The Yips in Golf by Smith and others, there seem to be 2 main explanations for the yips in the research community. These 2 explanations are that they are either caused by dystonia or the phenomenon of choking. Dystonia is a neurodegenerative disorder that impacts the basal ganglia portion of the brain's ability to properly function. While more research is needed to be sure, many think this is due to issues with the release of dopamine, the pleasure chemical in the brain. In physical applications, this leads to the body's inability to fully control muscle activity with symptoms such as jerks, tremors, and freezing of muscles in the arms and hands. Dystonia is most common in athletes, musicians, dentists, and surgeons, but of these groups, musicians are actually affected the most. The other major contributor to the yips in athletes is the phenomenon of choking. Choking, as I'm sure we're all familiar with, refers to the worsening of athletic performance in high-pressure situations. Smith and others suggested that there were 2 main causes of choking in athletes. First, athletes can have issues with self-focus that causes them to choke. What this is referring to is the increased focus by athletes on themselves, their irrelevant movements they make, and how they look rather than focusing on their goal, which makes them perform worse. The other explanation for choking is the issue of being distracted in general under pressure. This refers to the pressure just becoming so high that you pay more attention to the crowd and the score of the game instead of what you're supposed to be doing. Both of these explanations have been highly examined in golfers with yips to see which one is more impactful. To do so, they had one group of golfers with the yips practicing putting while recording themselves to mimic the self-focus issue, and they had another group of golfers with the yips practicing putting while counting backwards from 100 by twos to mimic the general distractions under pressure. These golfers' putting under pressure situation improvements were then compared to those of the yips who had practiced normally, and they found that both of these groups performed much better in high-pressure situations. As a quick side note, golfers that predicted they would perform worse, meaning score higher, actually wound up having less issues with the yips than those who thought they would score better, possibly because they were less distracted by their scores when they were golfing. Whether it be dystonia or choking, both of these yips factors have a relationship with anxiety. Anxiety levels actually don't seem to differ too much between those who have the yips and don't have the yips. However, among those who do have the yips, increased anxiety did lead to decreased performance, possibly explaining the spectrum of yips that those who suffer from it face. As a result of this, anxiety is a high center of focus on yips studies. Because there aren't a lot of physiological studies on anxiety in humans, a lot of this research focuses on fear-based studies in animals since anxiety and fear are closely related. These studies would suggest that the amygdala is like the watchdog in the brain in that it recognizes when you are in a dangerous or anxiety-inducing situation. The hippocampus is the diplomat that weighs all the possible responses, and the hypothalamus is the master controller that decides which course of action is the best. There needs to be more empirical studies on these mechanisms to confirm this explanation, however, so the best data researchers can use is the subjective experiences of those who suffer from the yips. Research also suggests some possible treatments to the yips. Specifically, drugs like alcohol and beta blockers are strong anxiety relievers that can help treat the yips. While both of these drugs can help with the choking aspect, alcohol is more successful in alleviating dystonia, as beta blockers only have limited success in alleviating dystonia. In addition, while these drugs are effective in treating the yips for most professions, many sports like the PGA, archery, and shooting sports have reclassified these as performance enhancers and banned their use.
Thanks, Monty. That was pure brilliant. Now I'd like to spend some time on some interesting cases of professional athletes who have had the yips or still do. Kevin Na is a 36-year-old professional golfer who had been on the PGA Tour since he was 21 years old. He has 4 PGA victories and 2 top 10 finishes at majors. The thing about Na is, though, he can't swing. It's Saturday, May 12th, 2012. Na is on the 14th hole of TPC Sawgrass for the Players' Championship. He is 2 under on the day and 10 under for the weekend, good enough for second place at the time. Na stands behind his ball and takes 3 practice swings, which is a lot as it is. Then he takes a breath and steps up to his ball. Immediately upon arriving, he turns around and walks back behind the ball, no hesitation. He takes 2 more swings and addresses the ball once more. He waggles. And he waggles. And he waggles. 7 times he waggles his club behind the ball. Finally, he is ready to swing. His backswing looks great, but on the way down, he completely lifts his body up and swings over the ball, then waggles twice more. He begins to swing again, and then stops at the top. Is heard on the broadcast. That's weird. I thought fans weren't supposed to talk while a player is standing over the ball. Turns out Na is screaming at himself for not being able to take his swing. He's paralyzed. 1 more waggle, and he finally hits a bomb down the fairway. All in all, this one swing took him well over a minute after the time he put the ball in the tee box, which is an absurd amount of time. Na finished Saturday 4 under, alone in first place on the weekend, but unfortunately fell apart on Sunday with a 6-bogey 76, dropping him all the way down to 7th place. Interestingly, Na may be the first slow golfer to ever apologize to his playing partner for being too slow. Na continues to struggle with this, but has managed to decrease his time on the tee box drastically throughout the years. He still plays at a very high level on the PGA Tour. The yips are not exclusively a golf phenomenon, however. The baseball version of the yips was originally called Steve Blass disease, named after Pirates pitcher Steve Blass, who was an all-star caliber starting pitcher from 1964 to 1972, but inexplicably lost his command and threw 84 walks in less than 89 innings in 1973. The following year, he was out of the majors for good. However, I'd much prefer we talk about Rick Ankiel. Ankiel was an extremely highly regarded pitching prospect who finished his senior year of high school as USA Today's High School Player of the Year in 1997. The St. Louis Cardinals drafted him later that year, and he was an elite prospect in their system until his eventual call-up in September of 1999. In 2000, his year 20 season, he was 11-7 with a 3.50 ERA and was second in NL Rookie of the Year voting. And the Cardinals won their division, leading them to an NLDS bout with the Atlanta Braves. Through injuries to the top two starters on the roster, Ankiel ended up as the Game 1 starter to face eventual Hall of Famer Greg Maddux. After throwing 2 scoreless innings, the third inning is where his disaster began. After Maddux reached base with 1 out, he threw 2 wild pitches to Andrew Jones, allowing Maddux to get to third. He walks Jones and throws 1 more wild pitch to Chipper Jones, allowing Andrew to reach second before retiring Chipper. With 2 outs, he throws his 4th wild pitch, which allows Maddux to score. He throws 1 more wild pitch and allows 3 more runs to score before being yanked by Tommy Lasorda without finishing the inning. The Cardinals end up winning the series without Ankiel throwing another pitch. He next got the ball in Game 2 of the NLCS against the Mets, where he was unable to finish a single inning, throwing 5 more balls past the catcher. In the Game 5 elimination game for the Cardinals, Ankiel was given 1 more chance in the 7th inning in relief, but unfortunately threw 2 more wild pitches and was pulled without finishing the inning again. Against the Mets, he totaled 4 outs and 5 walks. In 2001, he was given another chance to start, but had a 7.13 ERA through 6 starts in which he only pitched 24 total innings. He was sent down to AAA to figure out his command issues, but it became clear that they were not getting better. He free fell all the way to the Rookie League, where he spent time both pitching and hitting. Both 2002 and 2003 were lost to injury, but in 2004 he was given another opportunity during September call-ups. In 5 relief appearances, he gave up 6 runs over 10 innings and was promptly sent down. For most baseball players, this is where the story ends. After 2 failed stints 3 years apart on top of Tommy John surgery, most pitchers don't get another shot in the bigs. Ankiel is one of baseball's greatest exceptions. In 2005, he announced he would be working full-time towards becoming an outfielder. It is now August 9th, 2007. Rick Ankiel is making his first major league start in 3 years at a completely different position. He said, "Driving to the park knowing that I'm going to be an outfielder today, and I don't have to worry about throwing strikes, it was fun. I felt like this giant weight had been lifted off my shoulders and I could breathe again." Ankiel will be starting in right field and batting second for the Cardinals 7 years after his NLDS disaster. He receives a huge standing ovation during his first at-bat, but is unable to get on base then or in his next 2 at-bats. In the 7th inning, up 2-0 with 2 outs and runners on second and third, Ankiel once more steps up to the plate. He waits on a 2-1 curveball and belts it to right field for his first home run as a position player in the majors. Ankiel had done it. He exercised his demons and found a way to make baseball fun for himself at the highest level. To be a major league pitcher is one thing. To be a major league hitter is another. But to make it as a pitcher, fail, and then persevere as a hitter, that is astonishing. Ankiel went on to be an everyday starter in 3 full seasons, 2 with the Cardinals and 1 with the Nationals, while bouncing around as a platoon guy in stints with Kansas City, Atlanta, Houston, and the New York Mets. He was a bit too old and not quite good enough of a hitter to become anything close to a star, unfortunately. But despite our underdog story not quite evolving into Cinderella, to play 7 years as a major league outfielder under Ankiel's circumstances is still uniquely incredible. That brings us to Markelle Fultz. Some say the Yips aren't in play here due to his thoracic outlet syndrome diagnosis after seeing many doctors in 2017 and 18. However, I'd argue that this is almost textbook Yips. Fultz was drafted out at the University of Washington in the 2017 draft, first overall by the Philadelphia 76ers, who looked poised to finally see their long rebuild pay off. They had Embiid and Simmons already, but what they needed was that perfect great shooting combo guard to complement their strong interior game and passing. Fultz looked to be the missing link, the piece that would bring Philly over the top. He shot over 40% from the 3 in his 1 season at UW, and had the ball handling skills and slashing ability to be a superstar. Unfortunately for Fultz, everything was about to change. On September 27, 2017, during training camp, Mike Schmitz of ESPN reported a drastic difference in Fultz's free throw form. His once silky smooth high release was replaced with an awkward hitch and a release point much closer to his chest. This issue persisted into the preseason where his free throw form was just as odd, and he was not attempting any 3-pointers. He missed time with shoulder soreness, but in the games he did play, he was unimpressive to say the least. His shooting splits were way down from his college ones, and his free throw line routine seemed to change from game to game. At times, he'd just seemingly heave the ball towards the hoop, and at others, he'd juggle it up to the top of his head. His rookie season was uneventful in a basketball sense, as he rarely played, but quite eventful in that he had to deal with constant media scrutiny over his lost form. He talked of finding his form again, relearning his shot, and starting all the way over, but it seemed like no matter what, the form he had at Washington was gone. Over the summer, he worked with Drew Hanlon, one of the game's top shooting coaches, who he was referred to by Joel Embiid. Hanlon said while working with him, "With Markelle, obviously, he had one of the most documented cases of kind of the yips of basketball in recent years, where he completely forgot how to shoot and had multiple hitches in his shot. This quote plus the bizarre footage can't help but make me believe that this is a case of the yips."
And I would actually agree with this based on the research I did. Based on the articles that I looked at, the hitch in his shot really is indicative of the freezing motion in the forearms and hands that many people find with the yips. Coming out of DeMatha High School, which is a great basketball academy for school basketball players, Fultz had the option of going anywhere he wanted to, as he was one of the highest rated 5-star recruits in the nation. Despite this, he chose to go to Washington to play his college basketball. This leads me to believe he could also have the yips because he chose to go to a place that has lower pressure in their basketball games as opposed to going somewhere like Kentucky, Duke, or even staying home and playing at Maryland. This would make sense when it comes to his problems he had later in his career when he went to the NBA, in that when he went to the NBA and played on a larger stage, his anxiety would have been significantly increased, which could make his yips a lot worse.
So Hanlon, myself, Monty, and even Fultz can't deny that there were mental issues at play. In response to that Hanlon quote, Fultz said, "What happened last year was an injury. When you're used to doing something the same way each and every day and something happens, of course you're going to start thinking about it. It's just normal. Thinking about it causes golfers to forget how to putt, baseball players to lose their command, and can even cause basketball players to be unable to find their silky smooth jump shot that got them to the NBA." By November of Fultz's second NBA season, he was out of the starting lineup and soon to be back on the injury report. In early December, Fultz finally got a diagnosis that showed that his issues were not purely mental, however. Fultz was diagnosed with thoracic outlet syndrome in December of 2018, which is characterized by compressed nerves between the ribcage and collarbone, which can cause pain and weakness in the shoulder area. Should I speculate on whether or not this diagnosis is real? Probably not. It's kind of rude. Will I anyway? Of course. Fultz visited about a dozen specialists before getting his diagnosis. His free throw form was absolutely brutal for quite some time during his Sixers stint, while he managed to pull off his hezzy pull-up Jimbo from the elbow without a hitch. Shooting while moving, off the dribble, the key being without thinking, was not nearly as bad for him as, say, a catch-and-shoot 3 or a free throw. In spite of his diagnosis, the now thriving 76ers could no longer sit around and wait for him to figure it all out, and shipped him to Orlando for pennies on the dollar in 2019. Fultz has completed a mostly full season as a starter in Orlando, and he has begun to find his footing again. He restricted his relationship with his overbearing mother. He got out of the brutal Philadelphia media market and entered a much more relaxed market in Orlando, where he could focus on basketball and not on himself. His free throws no longer look like that of a child too weak to shoot, and while his three-point shooting still needs a lot of work, he is able to hit threes at times. Orlando is poised to make a playoff appearance when we finally restart basketball at the end of July, and everyone is excited to see Fultz keep improving and showing his worth in a league that almost chewed him up and spit him out. Just like physical injuries, mental injuries can be overcome and conquered. All three of these athletes have dealt with the yips, an innocent-sounding mental issue that in reality can be one of the most destructive and crippling things to deal with in the sports world. What I love is how each of them dealt with it in their own way. Na powered through it with sheer willpower, and Keel took an entirely new approach, and Fultz took some time out of the spotlight to figure himself out. The yips are that scary. They can affect you at any time, destroy your mental state, your confidence, and your self-esteem. They can make you have to give up the game you love. But like most any mental disease, they can be overcome. That concludes the regular part of today's podcast. We are now going to cut over to an interview with friend of the show, Matt, to tell us about his experience with a Yips-like episode.
So I'm here with Sam, and we're also calling in Matt Norfolk, who will be our guest appearance on today's podcast. How you doing today, Matt?
I'm doing all right. Glad to be here with you guys.
Thank you very much. We're going to ask you a couple questions, talk about your experiences with something similar to the yips, or maybe could be, depending on Monty's definitions. So we'd like you to run us through your injury and how it affected your ability to play baseball.
Sure. So I guess just as a little background, I was playing summer ball before I got to high school, and everything was fine. I was playing second base and I was pitching a little bit, but not consistently. And then I got to high school and started playing both summer ball and high school. And I want to say that's when everything sort of first started. You know, when you're playing for your high school team, that's when you really start to see like every day practicing, really increase in playing time. So I think this first sort of experience I had similar to the yips, it was my freshman year. I just wanted to make the team. I was second base was my best bet for that. So that's all I did. And sophomore year, I decided, hey, maybe I'll try as a pitcher too. And the tryouts, they were indoors in a basketball court. I don't know if that's really relevant or not, but I tried out as a pitcher and just could not hit the catcher for the life of me. Literally, I was bouncing, chucking it over on the wall. Like,
and before your high school tryouts, you could pitch accurately?
Yeah, that's correct. So this is, I guess, somewhat similar to the yips, but it was pretty isolated for me. Like it was like acute. It was the only time that really happened. So I don't know if that can qualify as a yips or not.
Well, did you have like high levels of anxiety for that tryout? Like, were you pretty nervous or scared, if you remember?
Well, I would chalk it up to nerves. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that does kind of relate to something we've talked about with the yips before, where even though anxiety doesn't necessarily cause yips, it's in cases where you have high anxiety, so you're trying out and kind of in a setting where you don't normally play baseball, it can be a high anxiety situation, like being in the basketball gym instead of on the field.
Mm-hmm.
It could kind of exacerbate issues that you might have had before, but just never been in a situation with that level of like pressure on you.
So then you said there was an injury, right?
Yeah. So at some point in my sophomore year season, I had sort of started playing outfield, get as much playing time as possible. And there was this one pretty isolated play that I remember. I was in center field and it was like, I think it was no outs or one out. I forget. Runner on third, and I get a fly ball, like medium length, right to me. And it's one of those situations where, like, usually in high school, they drill it in your head, like hit the cutoff. But there was a runner on third, and that was it. It's not like it was a base hit where the hitter was running to second anyways. Like, literally the only play that I had was to home.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't try and hold back anything. I just literally just let it rip. And the second I threw it, I both heard and felt a pop. And after that, it's never really been the same. It got better, it got worse. There were ups and downs, but that was that one injury where it sort of started to progress after that.
So did you see like a specialist or anything that diagnosed you with something, or do you just deal with it? I really just dealt with it. I regrettably did not do anything official. So you still experience pain when you're throwing, and like lifting your shoulder up?
So currently, no. Currently, all the pain is gone. It's gotten a lot better now that I've stopped playing. But even towards the end of my playing, I didn't really have any pain when I threw. It just sort of felt like off. Like I got enough rest, and I mean I did some stuff on my own too, but it was like I didn't really have any too much pain towards the end.
Did it like get to a point where like you literally physically couldn't move your arm through a certain range of motion, or is it just like it just felt weird when you tried to make the motion?
No, it never got that bad. I think if it was that bad, I like to think I would have gotten some extra help, but no, it because there was a little pain at first, but like the mindset like, oh, if I take time off, if I get help, like is my spot going to be there for me when I get back? So there was some of that into play as well.
Yeah, so while not being like a complete exact thing for the yips, it's definitely similar in that it's kind of in your head and you just have to kind of work your way through it. Especially being in a situation like you mentioned where if you don't get back like quick enough, you don't want to lose your spot. So you're going to be forcing your body to do stuff that you may not physically be ready to do, which you kind of leave, I'm guessing, some mental issues, like where you said where it felt weird even after you weren't feeling pain. It could kind of just be your body was just used to feeling pain during that motion, maybe.
Yeah, I think after the injury, it's sort of like obviously because of the injury, it was physical, but I think the injury sort of brought out the mental part of it, where even after, let's say I was feeling good and my arm was actually feeling pretty okay, like it was still in the back of my head, like, oh, this, like, what if it pops again? What if this happens? So I sort of like, after that moment, even when it got better again, I never really like felt confident to really like throw 100%. So I think that's like, it was pretty mental for me after that, because I really didn't, like, I was guarding my shoulder almost subconsciously. And as a result, like I said, I moved to outfield, but even playing second base, I could no longer make those like quick throws. Like it didn't feel right. And even in the outfield, I couldn't hit my cutoff on a line anymore. I sort of had to like slow things down and really think about what my throw was.
Mm-hmm.
I think that sounds quite a bit like what we're seeing with Bolts, in that there was probably pain,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the pain was making him like afraid to do his normal motion and go through it. And as we're seeing him recover from the injury, we're also seeing him gain some confidence back and being able to do his motion the way he used to.
Yeah, it definitely sounds similar. I mean, like I just didn't have the confidence. Like I sort of lost that feeling from my release point in a way, and it just never felt right. And there are ups and downs. Like you said, he started to gain back confidence and everything, but it was still never the same as it was before.
Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time on When the Lights Go Out. I'm not so smart.